This episode contains raw conversation about sexual assault. It also contains coarse language. Please use care when listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Recovery APN. Just wanted to provide our listeners with a quick update before we get into today's episode. I, along with producer Keith, will now be hosting the show. We wanted to give a quick shout out to Andy for all his hard work and dedication. We'll miss you and we love you. Today's episode is a special one. We had the opportunity to chat with Elle Woods. Not only is she an alumni of APN, but she's also a veteran. And I don't know, it was special because I'd never had the opportunity to get that deep into the woods with a veteran and talk about the struggles that she's had, whether it was during her service or afterwards. And so it was very knowledgeable and really gave me more clarity on her background and what she had to go through. So I think everyone listening will really appreciate that. And I know it was very eye-opening to me. So I'm excited for you guys to listen and looking forward to hearing from all of you. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Elle, welcome to Recovery APN.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming and thank you for traveling across the country to be here.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's you're coming from North Carolina?
Yep. Actually, I live 8 feet below sea level.
8 feet below sea level in Wilmington?
Yes.
Wilmington, North Carolina. I believe that's where Michael Jordan's from.
He is.
Yeah. Look at that knowledge, Keith.
Good job.
That's good. I was going to say that because I'm a big sports guy. Yeah.
He lived on Gordon Road, which actually is named for Jeff Gordon.
That's a crazy factoid.
Shouldn't it be the other way around?
Yeah, it should.
We should check and see if the Gordon family lives on Jordan Lane.
Yeah. Quick check-in. But yeah, so I know you've had the opportunity to listen to some of our shows, which is awesome and appreciate that. But just to give you a high level of kind of the structure is we like to get to know, our alumni and our guests on the show and kind of get to know what their experience was like leading up to their stay at APN. So ultimately what brought them to APN, and then we'll dive into what their experience was like at APN, whether it be their specific treatment plan or whether it be their relationships with other clients and or other our colleagues and staff at APN, and really dive deep into that. And then kind of towards the end, we'll kind of talk about the how you're utilizing the tools that you learned at APN in your everyday life now.
Makes sense.
Yeah, pretty simple, right? But yeah, so let's jump in. Let's kind of talk into, and again, you can go as deep as you want or as high level, whatever you feel comfortable in, but I would love to get to know you and what kind of ultimately led you to come to APN.
Well, I just want to preface with the 30,000 foot view. I came to APN for mental health treatment, dealing specifically with trauma, PTSD, and I found out here I had complex PTSD, so that's a whole new kind of bucket of worms.
Right.
But I'll get into how I got here. I had Katie as a therapist. It was phenomenal. I kind of ventured into the trauma track with Trauma-Lana, and that was phenomenal. I just reached a point where it was necessary. It was more than necessary. I think we wait until it's almost too late and the warning signs. Honestly, if I'd known that this existed, I would have come here a long time ago. A long time ago. But I came end of January to end of March. It was more than I expected. I didn't really expect much, but.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I tend to believe that we do a great job in spreading awareness around APN, but I also think that the people that aren't necessarily looking for it aren't going to find it. And it comes down to that willingness to want to get better.
Right.
And if you don't have that, if that individual doesn't have that deep down of like, hey, I want this. I see the red flags. I see the warning signs. I'm going to go look for it. It's sometimes hard to find. Although I will say, in my hotel room last night, I had The Office on, and I went to commercial, and I saw an APN commercial.
Oh.
So that was it's a funny little snippet I throw in. But anyway, going back to, so you came here for PTSD. Now, jumping back in kind of like early life, what led you to what led you to having PTSD? And kind of, I know you're a veteran. I'm kind of curious on like what led up to that point.
Yeah, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. My dad had been military, and not to sound like Forrest Gump, but his dad before him and his dad before him. So I come from a very long line of alcoholic, PTSD'd out military officers, and there wasn't a word for it. It was just don't bother him kind of thing. So we now know like PTSD isn't a formal diagnosis in the 80s, but 3 tours in Vietnam, they didn't know what it was. Like both of my grandpas, one was in the Pacific Fleet and the other one was ground forces in Europe. You don't have a word for it other than, oh, it's shell shock. So way, way, way before that. So you can see kind of how I was raised. Militant, not the Boulder lifestyle people think. My mom was a teacher, so there was a lot of order, but she also was gone a lot. I think unresolved trauma on behalf of my parents was a perfect storm for growing up in chaos and an alcoholic environment. And I don't want to fault them because I think they did what they could, but I really wish they would have done some trauma work, honestly. But that's why I'm here. So, my kids don't have to go on. Just raised in a very not necessarily loving household, but people raised on survival are different than people raised in love. You see that across the board. So I didn't really know per se I had childhood trauma or like core beliefs were so negative until I got here. I just thought it was everyday life. Mm-hmm. I went to college. Everything was great. I was in college when 9/11 happened, and I was particularly affected by that just from an emotional standpoint, but also like rage. I mean, it's the first time I'm like, I think I could kill someone, which is weird because it takes a lot for people to get to that point, and then it takes more to talk about it. But yeah, if you were that mad and you wanted to kill somebody, the military is a great place to go.
Well, and also talk about your goals. Like I know you were in the car last night for 2 hours and you talked about what you were going to college for. Mm-hmm. And then I found it very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers will as well, but kind of talk into kind of what you wanted to do and like what your career ambitions were when you were going to college and then the pivot there.
Okay. I went to college. I wanted to be Jerry Maguire or I wanted to be Melissa Stark and work 1 day a week with Monday Night Football. So I took a broadcast communications, like Disenchanted 20s is awesome, a broadcast and communications degree, but also I knew I was going to go to law school eventually to write the contracts and be my own version of Jerry Maguire. That did not happen at all. So I was trying to kind of find my way after college, bumming around, trying to work at Denver news stations. Actually, I was trying to work at CNN, but I didn't really know what you had to put in. Like paying your dues is terrible. So I'm fine with hard work. I've always had like 3 jobs, but that was like typing captions. Mm-hmm. So they told me, hey, if you want experience, you have to do something really noteworthy or to stand out. You have to get experience then, because I knew I wanted to sit in front, be on camera, not weeding around in the back for 10 years. So,
totally can relate to that.
So I remember watching like 4th of July movie marathons, right? The We Were Soldiers comes on. And I'm like, oh, he's a combat correspondent. What is that? And I was like, wait, that's the guy in Full Metal Jacket. Like, I'll do that. This aha moment of, okay, well, that's just what I'm going to do tomorrow. Combined with, okay, it's orderly. I think I would be drawn to that environment. Coming from chaos, you look for order, but also it's not a bad thing to join the military. And still running off 9/11, I mean, that's what a lot of people did. A lot of people felt the way I did. A lot of people still do. Mm-hmm. So I looked around at all the different branches, and like it's remarkable how little they were taking. Like for officer track, the Air Force, we want a navigator or a refueling officer. I was like, oh, that sounds stupid. No offense to anyone who does that, but that's not in the action. So that's not going to get me to where I want to go. I knew I didn't want to be in the Navy because I didn't want to be stuck on a ship. I fell prey to the $20,000 enlistment bonus for the Army. Thankfully, while I was at the Military Entrance Processing Center in Denver, the Army guy was kind of showing off, and the recruiter, like, oh, you're in the Army now kind of attitude. And seriously, this woman was an angel. By the grace of God, this woman, a Navy member, comes and just like shoves me in the female bathroom. She's like, you're not in. Walk away. You're not in. If he's lying to you now, your contract probably isn't what he says it's going to be. And I was like, but I'm going to have $20,000. She's like, no. It's an advance. Like, totally bamboozled. So really, just to make him mad, I remembered that the Marines and the Army shared a building in Boulder, and I saw the Marine recruiter, and I was like, well, I'm not joining the Army. I'm going to go home with him. And I pointed to the Marine recruiter, and he's like, standing there with his dip, like, okay. So he gives me a ride back to Boulder, and the whole time I'm like, well, dodge that bullet. When I get there, back to the office, he's like, so did you want to join the Marines? I was like, absolutely not. You guys are freaking crazy. No. And he's like, get out. You wouldn't last a second in here. And I was like, that's it. Sign the papers. So kind of the hothead mentality didn't pay off, but I did join the Marine Corps. I was set to ship out to Parris Island, and I happened to get a call from the officer tract saying, hey, why do you have 2 college degrees and you're going the enlisted route? I just want to know. So again, fortune tells me, like, now this is a second person who's saying, why don't you just try the officer route first? And then see, you can always go back. So I try the Marine Corps. I go to OCS. I make it through. I'm doing well. I should preface also, the Marine Corps is the only branch of service that doesn't let you choose your job, because they're like, you're a Marine first, man. That's the biggest, greatest thing there is on the planet. So while I'm trying to get to be a news anchor, like, oh, I know, I'll just, film a couple things. Explosions don't bother me. This will all work out. I had to fight tooth and nail to graduate at the top to get to pick my job, but I was selected for a public affairs officer, which is exactly what I wanted. Unfortunately, I was selected based upon a picture that was circulating around, so that was a little unfair. I should have noticed that. So I was the public affairs officer of Marine Barracks, Washington, 8th and I, where the silent drill platoon is. It's the commandant lives there, the oldest post in the Marine Corps. The Marines there, our Marines fell under the White House, Arlington National Cemetery, Camp David, the White House Communications Association, Annapolis. So it was a very high visibility job. It was stressful. And it was there that I learned I maybe didn't want to be an anchor. So it's a really, really roundabout way of, pushing through physical, mental, any sort of just a really haranguing, hard environment. I mean, I'm still very proud of it. It's not something everybody can do. Of my officer class, we started with 76 and we commissioned 12 females. So I was one of them. Another one of my officer friends is going to the International Space Station next month. She's an astronaut after she was a wonderfully decorated, deadly helicopter pilot. So I should also say, like, I don't really harbor resentment towards the Marines. I met some really great people there. And I got to meet even better Marines here at APN as well.
Yeah. I wanted you to share that because it's something that, like, before you told me, like, I didn't know, and it's like it's part of your journey, it's part of your identity.
Yeah.
And it's something that maybe Keith and I can't relate to, but there's so many individuals that have gone through that path before and that have gone through ups and downs through that. And I'm sure you had multiple ups and downs through that, your level of service. And I think what I've noticed and what I can relate to, and something you said last night and something you said earlier, is it's like that hothead mentality, and it's like, I don't need support. It's like, I have this, I know I mentally have already accepted this challenge, and I'm not going to like face the facts and understand that this may or may not be the right decision, but I'm going to just use like my ego to make decisions. And ultimately those are probably the bad decisions we make. And I think that it's something that like I could relate to in my everyday life. So it's something to like to note that, you know, to ask for help is okay, right? It's
Absolutely.
not a bad thing to do.
Yeah, I would say to your point, like, how many people go into a college track not knowing what they want to do, but they go to college because it's the right thing to do.
Correct.
And they get caught up in bad habits, like substances, not knowing what to do, and they graduate their mid-20s with hundreds of $1,000s worth of debt, and now they have a serious addiction. So
Totally.
The military also is one of those, but it's at a younger age because you can go when you're 17.
I thought it was 18.
Your parents can sign off when you're 17.
Oh.
And a lot of parents do. So you're dealing with every walk of life in a cultural melting pot, and then you're adding a lot of testosterone and you're arming it.
When did you feel, like, when did it hit you that you, how should I put this? When did you feel like, once you left the Marines, when did you come to the realization that you went through a level of trauma, that you're like, wow, like looking back on that, like, wow, like that was a traumatizing experience?
Yeah. To back up, I mean, I was sexually assaulted in the military, which at the time I was told I'm the only person that happened to. And this is why boys, girls, and alcohol don't mix. And I thoroughly believed that. I did everything right, per se, like as in terms of military police, NCIS investigations, contacting your congressman, because that's always the default. And I sought help. When I went in 2004, it was initial invasion. So we were in a panic strife mode. Like, it's not if you're going over, it's when you're going over. So the atmosphere was gearing up to you're going in the fight. You might not come back. You're going in the fight. And also, like, we don't have time for mental illness. So when I said I'm going to go to Bethesda for counseling, or I went to Walter Reed also because they did have a sexual trauma group. I got written a diagnosis with PTSD and major depressive disorder. When I came back and reported to my command, like, hey, the recommendation is counseling, my commander ripped it up and said, well, he's not operational, clearly. So that was the mentality in 2004 through 2007 when I was in. And I think a lot of people suffered that mentality also early on, but now we're in a better place where you can ask for help. So to answer your question, I knew something horrible happened immediately. I reported it within hours.
Yeah. And I think that you hear both sides of that. You hear people that go through those level of traumas and they say, oh, like, that wasn't so bad. I don't want to report it because it's going to halter my career growth. So I'm just going to, put it to sleep and keep going. And then and they don't realize when it pops up, and they kind of like go down a deeper and deeper hole. So I commend you for speaking up when it happens, because, you know, a lot of people don't. But I would like to get into, if you don't mind sharing, about the Netflix special and how that came about. If you don't,
it wasn't a Netflix special. It was a film that was nominated for an Oscar, and it won Sundance Audience Choice Award. So the film is called The Invisible War. I didn't realize I was going to be one of the 8 subjects of it. But I felt relieved, honestly, when I found out that sexual assaults happen to other people, because I had just been told, you screwed this up. This is your fault. We're never sending another female here again, ever. It just doesn't work. I was contacted by a PR team, and they had been in touch with the second female Marine who they'd sent after me, who had a similar situation, and she knew who I was because they were told, oh, you got to be a Lieutenant Helmer. Don't be a Lieutenant Helmer. That was kind of the warning of don't get assaulted or don't put yourself in a bad position. So she found me on Facebook and got them in touch, a producer and kind of investigative reporter team. So most of the film had already been completed, and I was an add-on, but I just was shocked that there was actually a film about military sexual trauma. It's still on HBO. I got to be a part of it. They used my picture for the publicity, so even though I'm like the last one there, because I'm a media officer and trained, I got to do a lot of speaking for it. So opening at universities, like Conference of World Affairs, any sort of women's organization, those really picked up. I filed a federal lawsuit also. The first lawsuit that was filed with the movie covers is suing the Department of Defense. And the lawsuit was dismissed ultimately, saying that rape is an occupational hazard. So I wasn't aware that rape was incident to service when I joined, as most people aren't. So my lawsuit was focused more on the retaliation and the reprisal, and that it's even worse than the incident itself in a lot of times, and why should you lose your career going forward? And mine was also dismissed with commanders have full discretion. So the culture is still there. There are tons of people going through exactly what I went through, and it's never going to change. And the Department of Defense estimates it's closer to 25,000 rapes and assaults each year.
Wild. But I have a question, and I didn't ask you this in the car yesterday. I wanted to save it for the podcast, but going through that traumatizing experience and then ultimately being a part of a documentary and then having the opportunity to speak to individuals, and whether it be in person at the press conferences and or through the documentary itself, did it help relieve any of the frustration or anger knowing that you were ultimately helping and spreading awareness about the topic?
I know now I completely dissociated. I didn't have a word for it because I was numb. I did it very well. I'm fine to talk on live TV about what happened. I'm grateful. That's why I did it, to help people.
Right.
I mean, I knew the lawsuit wasn't going anywhere. There's no money associated. It's to raise awareness. So yeah, I mean, they're altruistically, I love that people gained momentum and knew that this happened and that it's highly prevalent in the military. Maybe they thought twice, or maybe a commander acted differently. I'm not sure. But yeah, speaking about it, I could totally numb out, talk to you like I'm talking to you now, have zero emotion. And that definitely caught up with me while I was here. Totally.
So let's talk about like the tipping point that got you to APN. Like, I guess, and however much detail you want to provide, but like, obviously there were, whether it be days, weeks, years where you're settled, you get married, you have a child, and you're kind of living in North Carolina, and then something has to happen where you finally pick up the phone.
Right. For me, it was just accumulation of a lot of grief and large events, like my parents dying, bringing 3 kids into the world, a hurricane, things that everyone deals with, not necessarily just a veteran. But adding that all up and kind of putting it in a snow globe and shaking it up, you don't really know what the next shake is going to be. For me, it was feeling depressed and calling a healthcare provider and saying, hey, the antidepressant I've been on, it just isn't working. But I had maxed out at 200 milligrams, completely maxed out. So, okay, well, let's get off the Zoloft and let's try something else. What they didn't say is you should taper. And I'm still on a wait list for a counselor with that organization, but there was no follow through. The medication just came in the mail. It was start this, everything will be great. I got really sick. So withdrawing cold turkey from 200 milligrams of Zoloft was probably the worst thing I could have done. But I'm grateful it happened because it did lead me here. I finally just reached a point where I'm like, I know I need to take something. I know I do. But I'm not going to be this haphazard, willy-nilly. You're not going to send it to me in the mail, send it downrange and say, figure it out. We'll see you in 3 months. So that's what led me with the medication management aspect here, but also what goes up must come down. And when you just keep adding and adding and adding and never process things just because you go through life or you don't think you should talk about it or who's going to relate to me on a military level. It's very difficult to find veterans, really, unless you're in a lot of veteran organizations and then you feel like that's all you associate with. But for me, I mean, like, the uniform's off. I am very proud of that. I still want outside connection. And I didn't have a community also. That's a big thing. I felt like I was suffering in silence. I know that. Mm-hmm. And I was struggling completely without any lifeline, any rope. So all I knew, and I told Dan this, all I knew was Passages of Malibu. Like, they do a great job with their commercials. I just remember that, and I was like, I think I need to go to Passages of Malibu. So I called Passages of Malibu, and they're like, well, do you have an addiction? I'm like, no. Like, oh, sorry, you can't come. I'm like, but it's gorgeous here. So that led me to call around, to Google search. I got very lucky finding APN. I feel like I almost found it too late because you shouldn't be in crisis. I did have to call the suicide hotline with the VA. I did have to leave a message on there, and they still haven't called me back. But there are such significant gaps. And I had gone to private counseling. I didn't know it wasn't effective. I feel like you get in these patterns in life where you're like, I'm checking the box. I'm going to counseling. I wasn't doing anything. It wasn't even scratching the surface. It was just like every 2 weeks I'll go and tell you how things are going. But there wasn't a challenge. And I did experience that at APN. There weren't assignments or digging deep or root causes, which I appreciated so much because if you're just talking to somebody, I mean, don't consider it necessarily counseling. Yeah.
I think back to what you just said about you almost found APN a little too late and you found it in crisis mode. Mm-hmm. I think more often than not, most people find themselves in that scenario because people tend to find the easier, softer way to kind of deal with their problems, and that's finding a counselor and keeping it surface level.
Yeah.
That's finding a way to justify in your brain that you're doing the right thing, but you're almost like not giving it 100%, and you're just like status quo, and you're just like you're like in my head like a functional alcoholic or addict.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you show up for work, you get to work, you work your 9 to 5. You're present. You're sending the emails, and then you leave. So it's like unless people are really like know like what you're doing, like you can get away with it. And I think that people in their head feel they push the line further and further until something happens.
Right.
And so like I say that because I don't think you're alone in that scenario where people call in crisis, and that's what makes I don't know, APN special, and I'll give a quick shout out to our contact center team here. It's like they get on the phone and they're getting a call from someone in that crisis mode, and they almost have to calm them down and talk to them about the program, and then ultimately do the intake process. But more often than not, you have those phone calls. So I just wanted to give you some level of like clarity and almost like cushion that, you know, you're not the only one in that scenario.
I feel good about that. I do know that now, especially from the other veterans checking in here.
Right.
We all were like, this place has to help me right now. I mean, kind of treated this almost like an emergency department.
Right.
And it shouldn't have been that. It did it very well as a triage for further treatment. But I'm with you. But we wait often way too long to seek help. And we're getting ineffective treatment. I mean, I'd liken it to like you're going to the gym and you're doing the elliptical every day, but then you're asked to lift a lot of weights after 2 years and you can't. You're like, but I work out every day. I show up. Sure, you can, but if you're not focusing and you're not really digging deep and putting these like metrics almost, then how do you know you're making success? If you're just going in and doing the motions, is it enough?
Yeah, I like that example. And I think what comes to mind there to me is stigma, right? Where people understand that they may need more help, but they're uncomfortable with what comes with that. Oh, I'm going to have to leave work for 30 days. What's my coworkers going to say? What is my boss going to say? What is my wife going to say? What are my kids going to think? What is my friends going to think? And they're very reluctant to get the help because of the stigma that's attached with it. And it goes back to kind of like your journey through service of like, should I report this or not? What are people going to think? I'm like a rat or a tattletale? Should I just brush it down? And then and that just piles up. And then again, it just hits this crisis mode. And now it's like, you don't know what to think.
Yeah. I mean, the slightest thing bothered me. It was just a vast explosion of all the emotions. And if you'd ask me like, what's wrong? I would say, oh, it's the Zoloft. I'm getting off the Zoloft. But if I really sat and thought about it, it was stuff from decades ago. I'm like, why is this head? Your mind is racing. So I found it really helpful to slow down here. And yeah, the stigma, absolutely. I still get like, it must have been nice to take 2 months off away from your kids. Must be nice to go to the mountains. You know what? It was. It was very nice. Thank you for asking.
I have to hop in. I got a question for you. You've made so many confident decisions, and Dan's touched on this a little bit, but you know, reporting the incident immediately, your decision for which branches to pursue, things like that. After you've made the Google search, you've made the decision and called APN. There's a time period between that call and arriving here, and I think for a lot of people, there's probably like nerves, fear, wishy-washiness about it. But I'm guessing maybe not for you based on the confidence level of your decision making. What was that time period like for you, and how long was that time period between first contact and arriving in the lobby?
I initially called probably 2 weeks before and asked if they accepted VA, which they do, but because I live out of state, a lot of veterans run into this barrier of, well, our VA would prefer you go to a local place. So, Keith, a lot of sadness, disenchanted, reaching out saying, I'm trying to get help and no one will help me, and you're having me call a suicide hotline and leaving messages. None of this feels right at all. So it was scary. I didn't want to go. I had a lot of guilt and shame about leaving my toddler child, 3 kids. But I also felt like we live so quickly, right? And I remember a statement like, everyone will die for their kids, but very few will actually live for their kids. So I remember thinking, I have to do that. And just a refusal. I mean, I'm very stubborn, as a lot of veterans are. Like, I refuse to live like this for another 42 years. I won't do it. My quality of life is awful. I feel this way. I feel sick. I'm getting brain zaps. I mean, I lost 10 pounds, which actually was nice, but like in 3 days. It was a lot of every emotion, possibly. I mean, I didn't feel excitement. I felt guilt, shame, nervousness, anticipation. I had no idea what to accept or what to expect. And then I think having no expectations was probably the best thing coming in here, truthfully. But because what I found was greater than I could have even imagined. The night before, I don't think I slept at all. I remember getting to the airport, like walking in and then turning around and calling my husband. I was like, I think I'm okay. I think I overreacted for a month.
Well, it's really interesting to hear that, because I'm sure everybody has that moment, or lots of people have that moment on their way to treatment. And for someone who's so determined, so clear of mind and ready to get help, and a veteran, it's interesting to see that you had that too. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course. I think a lot of people, especially veterans, we all love the quote, like, the devil whispered, "You cannot withstand the storm," and the warrior said, "I am the storm." That was an embodiment. Like, this is my last ditch effort to save my life. So what does that entail? I don't know, but I know what I'm doing isn't working.
Totally. So let's get into what it was like for you at APN. So you show up at APN. Did you go to the detox first or straight here?
No, I came straight here, and then I did check in to detox a day later. It was wonderful, the detox facility. I wasn't like actively detoxing from anything, but again, if you go through healthcare, which a lot of veterans take that route, you're sent a lot of medications that aren't necessarily explained to you. So I had been taking like 3 milligrams of Klonopin, or 6 milligrams a day. Fortunately, I didn't get addicted to it, but the withdrawal potential and what the withdrawal that did happen here was significant, and no one explained the effects of a benzo to me. Now it makes entirely so much sense. But I checked in here first, and then the next day it's like, you probably need to go here, which was a medical decision that was made, and I appreciate it.
Right.
Detox was not as scary as I thought it was going to be, because I had the 2-hour ride down the mountain. Like, how am I going to explain all my stuff is at the lodge?
Right. And it's so funny. I can relate so much to that, where you have no idea what you're about to experience. Mm-hmm. Like the word like detox. You're like, and I just think, when I remember going through, and I was just like, ugh, like this is going to be miserable.
Yeah.
I'm going to be so pissed off. And then you get there and you're like, wow, like I could just like chill in bed. I have people taking care of me. Yeah. I have like the 60-inch screen TV, watch Netflix and chill.
Seriously. Yes.
It's like great. Listen, physically you're probably not feeling great, but like you're being taken care of, and it's not as bad as people think, especially at the APN one. But now going back up to the lodge, I'm kind of curious on what it was like what your treatment plan was like, what were specific groups that you'd enjoyed, what was, your community like here, and kind of the relationships you built.
Okay. The very first person I met walking in the building was another female veteran who had experienced sexual trauma. So that was relieving almost. Right. To know that somebody else had gone outside of the system and that we could talk about it without those feelings of like this. I mean, I still feel kind of a weight on my shoulders when I talk about it. I had a great roommate experience. I went to all my groups. Katie was my process group. I felt a very strong sense of welcoming. Maybe because of the time of year I came, it wasn't at capacity. Mm-hmm. But there was a bond very quickly, and myself wanted to go to my room and be by myself, which we call isolation.
Correct.
These obvious things that get pointed out to you here that you don't know. I'm like, okay, I ate dinner. It's time to go to my room and watch TV by myself, turn all the lights. I didn't see a problem with that. But here, it's so encouraging to play a game. And I remember meeting Brian, and he said the best therapy you will ever get here is not in any single room or any single group. It's going to be from a community. And that is the truest statement I ever heard. I'm still in touch with about 35 members. We have Zoom calls every week of the community that I was here with. It's the first time in my life I actually felt like I could have girlfriends too. And it wasn't a competition. Even though I don't overtly feel like I need to compete with other women, I think it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world. It's not exactly warm and fuzzy. Being a veteran, I mean, I was the only Marine who checked in, so that was kind of odd. They hadn't had very many female veterans, so instantly a good feeling, though, to be a part of a group. I did do the veteran tract with Brandon, so our group was helpful in the sense that veterans and first responders.
Yeah, so that's for people that don't know. APN provides a dedicated veterans and first responders group. So in order for you to be in that process group, call it, you have to be a veteran or a first responder, and it'll be dedicated to those individuals talking about their experiences, whatever they may be, PTSD, trauma, depression that's associated with their level of service in any capacity.
Yeah. That was another sub-community that felt really good and really safe because we've all been through it, right? The military, instantly, they teach you, you're all equally worthless. So we have that common bond of hilarious things you're not allowed to laugh at boot camp, but they are funny.
Totally. And I think what makes it special, and this is how I relate to it, is when I surround myself with other individuals that have struggled with addiction, substance abuse or substance abuse or alcohol, drugs or alcohol, I automatically feel that a long lost brother type thing.
Yes.
Where it's like, hey man, I'm already that much more comfortable with you, or a woman, where I'm already that much more comfortable with you, where it's like I don't have to have my guard up. I know we both went through battle on our own and have our own war stories, and it's you already have that bond, and you already it's there's no awkward introduction. It's totally get where you're coming from, and I could see from the outside looking in those groups that that's similar to what you guys, girls and guys, have in that veteran group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of first responders are previously veterans who just changed their uniform and continue to serve in a different capacity, and they've glanced over their military service entirely to put on a different uniform. There were a lot of really good firefighters, EMTs. My second roommate here was a 9/11 first responder.
Wow. And
hearing her stories were, I don't adequately have the words, but sharing and listening to people's stories helped me a lot because I actually never fully told my story in the veterans group. I did in process group. But listening to people talk about moral injury or being lost in the system, stuff like that, where it's not necessarily that you had a great battle or a Medal of Honor run, or you did have significant combat or sexual trauma, PTSD. It's just a common denominator is that we've all been in the organization. We all would give a blank check to the government for our lives, and it didn't work out so well.
Yeah, and I also feel what comes to mind to me during what you just said is validation. Exactly.
Yeah, the moral injury session. Maybe it was 2 days, maybe it was 3. I just remember hearing about that because I'd never heard of moral injury, right? But for veterans, that's so strong, especially first responders. You don't know that you've been morally injured and that you probably might have morally injured as well. So just a learning point, but also hearing people's stories is validating. But at some point I was like, oh, okay, I'm not the worst one.
Totally.
It felt really good at the time.
It's really interesting that you ended up in a group with a 9/11 responder, first responder, because earlier you said that 9/11 was a very traumatic event for you. Was it surreal? Did it help with processing 9/11 or any of that past trauma to be sitting with a first responder from 9/11?
She was my roommate. So the instant respect I had for her and almost kind of a fearful admiration was there. I mean, trauma is trauma, right? Like 8 inches of water you can drown in, the same as 8 feet of water. But hers was harrowing in the sense that, like, I knew where she was. I mean, we were roughly the same age, so our life choices were different that put her at ground zero and me in Colorado. But in terms of carrying baggage your whole life and never knowing it's okay to set it down, we had that strong bond.
Yeah, it's intriguing. It's interesting. It's, it gets my mind going. Like I think about like other people that I've spoken to that have been there, and they have similar thoughts, and I go back to that validation piece of it must have been so like warm for you to hear like I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that went through this. I'm not the only one that thought like this. I'm not the only one that needed help. And it's like, okay, great. Like I'm not okay.
Yeah.
I need help, but that's okay because there's so many other people just like me that need the support.
Like we're all clinging to the same life vest. I mean, while I was here, there were 8 female veterans, and our stories were almost identical with regards to sexual trauma.
And so
that felt good.
Yeah.
I mean, horrible. If you can trauma bond over your worst moments, but then find a way to laugh in it too, that is bigger than suffering in silence.
And so if you were to look back on your experience at APN as a client, what sticks out to you as like the most impactful piece?
I would say making the decision to leave here with less baggage and having a community that reinforces that still. That why are you carrying this? Put it down. Like you're going back. An accountability factor, but also, I mean, we raised each other up. So I never had a community. I never would have been able to laugh about like my darkest moments ever. I mean, there was one instance that really stands out as like, that's probably when I needed to go to APN. Well, we're laughing about it. I mean, it was hilarious. And people were like, Elle, talk about that. And I'm like, like in the moment, that was really, really bad. But now we're all laughing about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's the girl who... I mean, there's joy in tears sometimes.
Totally. And I like how you keep emphasizing community, because I think people take that for granted and don't realize how important it is.
Yeah.
And I think people look at APN and or other facilities when they're in that crisis mode. I need to go to treatment. I need to learn these tools, and I need to be fixed in 30 days. And I need to go back to my regular day life and just be fixed.
Yeah.
Yes, I need the therapist to go into my body, flip the switch, and then go back to everyday life. And I think what people don't necessarily realize in the beginning is how important, yes, the treatment and working with a therapist and so on and so forth is important. But I think it's where you associate yourself, where are you putting yourself in, and who are you surrounding yourself with? Because I think when it comes to community, most people feel the most confident and comfortable in their own skin when they surround themselves with like-minded individuals.
Right. And you are, what is the study? You are a cumulative amount of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Oh, I like that.
So if you're spending time with people who have been through what you're going through, and we're all struggling, and we're on this journey, and there isn't a destination, but we know there's no magic pill you can take at APN that you leave suddenly fixed. There's no exact time frame, like 14 days of that should tune you right up.
Right.
I mean, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's a commitment going home. And I think for the veterans, or if any veterans thinking about going, like, yeah, we're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, but are we willing to sacrifice vulnerability,
uncomfortableness,
and doing the hard, like getting uncomfortable? I think that was a defining factor too of people who did really well here and people who were like, it was okay.
And I think I said this to you last night, but when I speak to individuals and try to provide any level of guidance or support, I always say APN can provide you with a great therapist and a very comfortable facility and all, like a staff that's going to work hard with you. And we're going to the treatment planning is going to be customizable to make sure you get the most out of it. But deep down, it's never going to work unless you're willing to go above and beyond. It starts with you and it's going to end with you. And you have to be willing to be comfortable and uncomfortable at all times. And if you're not, unfortunately, we can't tell you to do this. It has to come from within. And most times it's when you're in that crisis mode and you get to a point where I'm not willing to live the rest of my life like this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And obviously people refer to that as like a rock bottom, and some people have different rock bottoms in life.
And rock bottom has a basement. Right. Always does.
And so it's what are you willing to do? But I'd love to get into kind of life post APN.
I mean, I didn't want to go. Let me just say, I wanted to stay here and maybe write a book called Rehab is a Real Place. I felt like Brooks in the Shawshank Redemption for about a week. And then I found myself spending more time I'm so tired. I was tired. I mean, what you go through is huge. And I was like, I just need to take a nap. I need to take a nap. Well, no, spending too much time alone in my bed is probably what brought me here,
right.
A contributing factor. So it was very helpful having a text chain or making myself call people that I didn't even necessarily want to call and talk to them. Talking to you was helpful, the lifeline's not totally cut. And then knowing too, I probably would come back here to focus on smaller things in a smaller increment of time. Because it's a triage. So I left and I immediately started HBOT. I just decided the fight for my life still continues. I got a credit card. I'm calling it my Mentee B credit card. Mentee B is mental breakdown. But I put HBOT on it. I put ketamine. I put acupuncture. I put IV. I put personal trainer. I mean, the things that I did well here and the things that were part of the piece of the puzzle that led me to not feel like I was in a crisis anymore needed to be continued at home. And then I feel like the adage is always look at people who are doing something well and copy them, but do it your way. So I felt like the people who got out of APN who did it well, I would emulate, what are you doing for this? Are you working out? Or what books are you reading? The Meetup app, are you meeting new people? Because I think most of us would agree our community before wasn't necessarily the best environment for us. Or a byproduct of me being here was stopping, I'm not going to drink. That means I'm probably not going to go to Drunko on Thursday nights. I mean, but those were my people, or so I thought. So filling the gap of loneliness and isolation. I mean, there's total difference between isolation and solitude. And solitude's okay, but you can isolate quickly. So continuing your APN journey, going home, and pushing yourself every day just to get 1% better. And if you didn't do it that day, that's fine. Tomorrow, you'll get 2% better.
Totally. And I think you brushed on a lot of things, right? And a big piece of it was aftercare and being organized and being structured in your aftercare. When you're at APN or any facility, call it, it's very easy to stay on schedule because you're provided schedule.
Yeah.
It's easy to stay sober because people are watching you and holding you accountable. It's easy to do the right things because ultimately you have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
But when you leave, that structure and that organization is really up for you to define.
Yeah.
And it's up for you to say, okay, this is what worked for me at APN. I was doing HBOT. I was doing ketamine treatment. I was doing this. I was going to the gym. I was doing that, so on and so forth. And it's like, that was making me feel good. So I want to continue that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's unique is, and what I feel the people that are most successful is, they don't start planning that, okay, if I'm leaving, today's the 18th, and I'm leaving the 19th, let me start planning the 20th. It's like, okay, I know I'm leaving on the 18th. Why don't we start planning on the 8th?
Yes.
And so that when I get home, I know on the 19th, I'm doing HBOT and going to the gym. I know on the 20th, I'm going to this support group. I know on the 21st, I have this telehealth, whatever it may be, because it's like they didn't miss a beat. And I feel like when people miss beats, that's when mistakes and taking steps backwards come on.
If you feel like Brooks in the Shawshank Redemption, just being completely bewildered and overwhelmed because you're now stepping into an unstructured environment, or there's lag time with anything, yeah, absolutely. Planning your departure should probably start happening on day one. Especially where I live, there's a lack of mental health resources. So for me to even get appointments, it took a lot of planning. And I'm still honestly searching for a counselor I like who's not just a check in the box. But that's going to be forever. And I accepted that, and I'm totally fine with that.
Totally.
I love that you've done hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Did you discover that here, and did you try it here?
I did.
And how did you go about finding it when you went home?
I discovered it here just in the routine consult. And then, I had a traumatic brain injury, but also the benefits were phenomenal. The unit they have here is incredible. Where I went home was honestly, it looked like the submersible that went down on the Titanic, which I shouldn't talk about, but honestly it did. And it had a mask. Here was a completely different environment. You could watch Netflix, you could read a book. You didn't have to put a mask on, take it off. You didn't have to crawl in. I just did a Google search of hyperbaric oxygen. I did TMS. I didn't have deep TMS in my area, but I figured some TMS is better than no TMS.
Totally.
Ketamine, yeah.
And were these things that APN recommended, or were these things that you saw here, maybe participated a little bit in here, and then were like, I need to continue these back home?
All of the APN Plus I'd never heard of before, and I learned that here and thought, I'm going to take it home with me.
That's awesome. That's really cool that you stuck with that.
I'm super grateful. And anything new, I continuously look on the Instagram page like, oh, are they adding something new? Because I need to try that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I will attest and validate that our hyperbaric chamber, as we refer to it, is like the Four Seasons of hyperbaric chambers. Yeah. You know, you get in there, they make you feel comfortable. It's, you have your TV,
Mm-hmm.
They give you a piece of gum. They, you go in there and it's like you can take a nap. And I remember like going in, you feel, I don't really get claustrophobic, but like, you're in a tube, but it's like the perfect amount of clear where you don't necessarily feel like you're in I don't know. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I've been in the tube and I get claustrophobic, and it was still a lovely experience.
Yeah.
So,
They had it positioned at a window where I could either
look outside.
Yeah, I would watch the snowfall and be in this like, I don't know, catatonic state, like a great white shark or something. Like I'm not awake, but the snowfall and the sunset, I would take full advantage of that here, because it's also a lot harder to go home and find time to do everything. And ketamine involves an Uber, and for me, a babysitter. I would get it done here. Yeah, completely. If you're tired here, you can just go upstairs. If you're tired with your day, you have to continue on.
Totally. And that kind of leads me to like my last question. And in thinking about kind of your journey, if you had the opportunity to speak to a veteran that maybe has gone through a similar journey or is just struggling, what level of advice would you give them?
I'd absolutely say you're not alone. Statistics support what you're going through. If numbers don't mean a lot to you, then maybe hearing it from other people will. I believe in you. I've been part of an organization that'll chew you up and spit you out. I still have a great revere and esteem for it, as we all do, but it's hard when you get out. It's a loss of identity. It's a loss of brotherhood, sisterhood, of mission, basically, of structure, too. So I fully understand. The way the system is designed also is to put all of your health care into an organization that didn't expect the bow wave of what's happening now with mental health claims. And the number one inbound claims for the VA are all military sexual trauma, PTSD, anxiety, general depression. So people are listening. Like, the culture is changing. But I would encourage you to take things into your own hands. You can't wait on them. And I mean, I'm still waiting on them. Like, I'm still waiting for them to return my call from the suicide hotline. So you're in charge of your own life. I mean, you're the warrior. That was your storm. You're stronger than it. And absolutely, don't quit. I mean, don't quit. You can never quit. You can just get 1% better, and that's still better than you were.
No, it's incredible, and I can appreciate that. It's something that, like, I don't have a service background by any means, but I think it's important to, like, hear from someone like you, that someone has gone through that journey, and speak to that community, and like help remove that stigma.
I would absolutely remove the stigma, and I would do anything it took. Much like mission accomplishment, you do anything it takes, right? You'd call in the big guns. You'd call in naval fire. You get some snipers on it. Get some artillery. Why aren't you doing that with your life? Because your life is worth fighting for. You just have to get to that point, and then call in every avenue in your arsenal that you can. And for me, I mean, yeah, I'm a veteran. I get the benefits. I know they're not great. That's why I'm like, I'm putting it on a credit card. If I can make payments on a car, why can't I make payments on my life? I think that getting to that point, you are worth fighting for.
Totally. Well, Elle, phenomenal job.
Thank you.
And really, really appreciate you coming out to Edwards and joining the show.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who's listened. And if you'd like to see other episodes of the podcast, please visit apn.com/podcast. That is apn.com/podcast. If you have any comments or questions for us, you can email us at pod, that's POD, at apn.com. Again, email us at POD at apn.com. And please follow all of our socials on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Our handle is at APN Lodge. Feel free to visit and see all of our videos. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.